Perfect. So I am set up now. So let's go ahead and dive in to what we have. So first, if anyone needs interpretation, it's available. It is at the bottom of the screen. And so it's a little globe, and you're just going to select which you need and mute the original audio. The other thing I always like to make sure I tell everyone is to follow us on social media. We post a lot on there, different professional development that we do for parents, but also a lot of other great resources, things that are happening in our community, also things that are happening in the state, like Cal Able, if you've never heard of Cal Able before. So we are on Facebook and Instagram. So that's a great one to follow so you can stay up to date on what's happening special education wise within our county and our state. Okay, the other one we make sure we want you guys all to know about is Parents Helping Parents. They're our family empowerment center. So if you do have questions or you're looking for resources or support groups, they are a great organization to reach out to. Okay, so let's dive in then. Oh, I got people in the waiting room. Hold on, I gotta move my bar here. Okay, there we go. Um, so the learning goals that we have for today, sorry, trying to click out of this. All right. So our learning goals for today is that we want to gain a stronger understanding of the difference between accommodations versus modifications versus universal support. So when you're sitting in the IEP meeting for your child, that you have, you can contribute to that conversation, be able to ask questions, make some suggestions, get clarification, all those kind of things, so that you feel better prepared to have those questions on what you can ask for your child and what that might look like. And also we'll explore some examples of what that might look like in the classroom. So again, as we're going, if you have questions, you can unmute or drop it in the chat, and that'll help me be able to give you kind of some more specific examples that can be supportive. So really what we're going to kind of be talking about is really this kind of tiered supports, and we use tiered supports a lot in education. So in general education we have tiered supports, but also within special education we do as well. So really, like with that tier 1 down at the bottom is what we consider the universal supports. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but that is like our biggest group of students are receiving those universal supports. Then the next level up, kind of a little bit more intensive, is the accommodations. And that's going to be a smaller population of students who are going to receive specific accommodations. And then modifications is really going to be a very small population of our students, and I'll explain a little bit more as we go. But if you can think about it as like universal supports, those are available to all students. So that's going to be obviously our biggest group. And then accommodations is going to be a smaller group, and then modifications, again, will be our smallest population of students. So, let's dive in and talk a little bit more about that and what that actually looks like, or, how that would look in the classroom. So universal support. So over the years in education, we're really doing a better job of recognizing that all students learn uniquely. And so how can we build in strategies, so basically proactive strategies and resources into our classrooms so that all students can access the information? And some teachers do a better job of this than others. I can fully recognize that. And I'm aware of that. But we really talk a lot about in our teacher performance standards that they have, of like, how are we as teachers and educators building all of these things into our classroom so all students can be successful. So what that might look like is access to technology. So all of our students have Chromebooks now in their classrooms. And then within those Chromebooks, a lot of them have access to Chrome extensions, like things like Google Read and Write, text to speech, speech to text, all of those type of things. So all students have access to that and can use that as a resource. Also flexible seating. So more and more classrooms are incorporating, like some will have standing desks, some will have, a student can say, I learn better if I'm sitting closer to the teacher or if I'm sitting further back. So I think teachers are doing a better job at recognizing that we need to have different ways for students to be able to sit within the environment. Some have like wobbly stools, elementary classes do a little bit better job of this than our secondary. But yeah, flexible seating is kind of a thing that's being built in to our classrooms. And then also scaffolds that are built into instruction. So doing a better job of like putting in sentence frames, helping kids start the sentence. Or if they're having the unit is on like they're learning how to orally discuss something, they'll give them ways to start their sentence or to contradict or all of those type of things. So those are things that within the general education environment that don't even need to be in an IEP that you can request and ask for that support. Like my kid really struggles with writing. He's in 7th grade and it's like 2nd grade writing, if that. Right. And so part of like these universal supports, I tell the teacher, like, he's got to have graph paper. If you expect him to write it on that little tiny worksheet, it's not going to happen. Right. So those are just things that can happen without needing to go into an IEP meeting and have that formalized. So that's kind of your universal supports. We also have now, like back when I was in school, like, you had to do your state testing with pencil paper and everyone just kind of had to take it the same way, right? Now that we have it on the computer system, there are universal supports built into statewide testing. So this just kind of gives you an example of the resources that are available to all students. So on the left, they have these universal tools that any kid can access at any point for state testing. So that's kind of like, I just wanted to show this to you as like, that's the mindset now in education. Like provide kids the tools so that they can be successful. The ones for the designated supports, they don't have to be on an IEP, but the teacher can say, hey, I feel like Sam really needs to have a different print size. So they would go ahead and add that on to their like testing profile. So again, like already we're really looking at building these things into classrooms. So that's kind of like if you hear about universal supports, that's what we're talking about. Now, through the IEP process or even with a 504, we can then identify specific accommodations for that particular child. So we're saying like they actually need to have this in order to access their education. So sometimes it might start as a universal support and the teacher's trying some things out, like the graph paper, right? Like, maybe the graph paper would help them with doing their math assignment or a graphic organizer. And then after using that, we've identified like, man, they actually really need this. Like this is a tool, this is a support that works for them. And now we're designating that as an accommodation in the IEP. So we're saying like, no matter what math class he's going to go to now, we've identified, yep, graph paper works really well for him. A calculator works really well for him. So now we're adding these tools and saying they need to be a part of this child's IEP and a part of their education to access materials. The accommodation only changes how a student learns the material. It's not changing the what. So it's basically changing the access point, right? So it's like the use of a calculator or changing the setting. So they're like going into a different room to take a test, or the use of a wobbly stool or a fidget, so they're still going to be learning the same content and the same what as other students. We're just giving them some additional tools to help them access that. Whereas modifications now are this next more intense level. So this is like changing the actual what is being taught. And I'll give you some examples of that, but we are now like adapting the curriculum, the standards of what's happening in that class, which isn't a bad thing. Like we just have to make sure that we are appropriately giving the appropriate accommodations and modifications and not modifying things that don't need to be modified because we want them to stay on track with their grade level to the greatest extent possible. So here's just kind of a visual. This is for the accommodations, kind of a visual of like that we're with accommodations, we're still all moving towards the same goal. We also still want to hit the same standard, the same kind of expectation of where we want to see the student performing. But we're going to take different ways to get there, right? So all these different ways that we can get to that same goal, that's what an accommodation is. So if you can kind of keep that visual in your mind when you're in IEP meetings and you're talking about those accommodations. So is it like a modification? They'd be changing a whole different location on that mountain. But with accommodations, we're all trying to get to the same point, just different ways of doing it. Okay, so we can also think of it, the accommodations in like 6 different categories. So we have a category of organization and study skills. So does the child need highlighters, a graphic organizer, teacher notes is a big one, right? All of those things, like, do they need things to help them stay organized and to be able to perform the study skills that we want them to? There's also, you could think of it in terms of setting and schedule. So do they need to take their test in a different location? Do they need a visual schedule out on their desk? Do they need special lighting? I know in my office, I do. I can't have the fluorescence on or I'll get migraines, right? So I'm being accommodated for what my needs are. Do they need a visual barrier? You know, if there times during the day that they just need to have their own little sheltered, protective, quieter space? Maybe. So that would all fall under the setting or schedule. Then there's another category for teacher direction. So it's like how the teacher is giving the information to the student, right? How they're providing direction or instruction. So do they need to have things repeated? Do they need to pair visual with auditory? Do they need to have reminders to stay on task? Do they need multiple prompts? You know, all of those things. So it's like what the teacher is delivering to the student. We have, I guess we'll go right under that. So student response. So are there things that we need to change for how the student responds to it? So now maybe in a test, they can orally dictate the answers. They can use a calculator. They can use speech to text or text to speech, right? So there's how, do we need to consider how the student's response in accommodations? Then we have a lot of students with sensory needs. My son, we've had some meetings for him. He's got some sensory needs. Like he needs a fidget. If he's going to be able to sit in class all day, he's got to move. He needs to fidget. So, a lot of students have some sensory things that need to be built in, whether it's frequent breaks or access to an area that they feel is a calm space for them, any special seating, that kind of thing. And then the personal and care equipment, this is going to be for a much smaller population of students, but do they need any type of adaptive furniture? Sometimes we have students that need to have arms on the chair that holds them in, assistance with feeding, dressing out at PE, that type of thing. So if you can think about it in these kind of like 6 categories, and your child might not need something in all of these categories, but they might. So are we making sure that we are addressing each of the different zones or different areas? Again, feel free to drop questions in as we go and I'll try and answer them. Okay, so here are some examples then of, common accommodations that we see in the classroom and that are helpful for students. Okay, doesn't mean they need all of these or maybe any of these. So again, it's specific to each student. But this is a common kind of list of accommodations that you might see or the teacher or team might suggest. This is going to come, I'm going to send out the slide deck in an email after this. So, you don't have to memorize this. So you can definitely take a picture of it though, if that is helpful. But just some things to consider. I do want to show you this website, which, hold on, it's going to take me there in a sec. It's called Tech for All Learners. And it's kind of a cool site. I found it many years ago, and it's one I go to. But it has it broken apart of, what some of these accommodations might look like. So if I clicked on separate or alternate location, it gives some information of what that might be, what that might look like for Google Classroom, some different tools that could be used. If I go back and let's click on graphic organizers, it has some different graphic organizers that can be accessed and examples of what that might look like and how you might use them. So just kind of a cool site. So if you do have an IEP coming up for your child, or they're struggling in their class and you feel like they need a little something more, a little more support, maybe check out that website and see if there's anything that could help. I know I like throwing some extra graphic organizers at home when I'm doing homework with my child. And so, that's a place I could go get some more info. Okay, so the question we get actually from teachers a lot more than parents is, what about grading? Like, do accommodations affect a student's grade, and can it be marked on their report cards? So the answer for accommodations is no. A student's grade should not reflect that accommodations have been made. Again, if we think about that visual, like we're all trying to get to that same point, that same goal, we're just taking different ways to get there. So it should not be reflected on a student's report card or in their grade. So we're just providing access, right? So an accommodation is a change in the course, standard test, preparation, location, timing, schedule, and expectation, student response. But it's not changing. It's not lowering the standard or changing the expectation. We're working still towards that same goal. So no, it should not be reflected in their grade. Hopefully it should help their grade, really. Okay, so that's accommodations. So I see so is adaptive PE considered an accommodation? Adaptive PE that's an actual like service. So it would be more of a modification, but they could also be providing accommodations as well. So they could be accommodating them in the PE class and providing that assistance, but they could also be doing some modifications as well. So it just depends to what that might look like for the student. So it could be both, right? So they could be modifying certain things when they're doing their own pull-out service. It's probably more of a modification. And then if they're supporting the student and accessing general education PE, it could be more of an accommodation, but it could move over to modification as well. So again, just totally depends on the student and what they've decided is going to be best for them. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lindsay. All right, so for modifications, now we're actually changing the learning target. We're changing like what the child is learning. Okay, so the curriculum is adapted to allow the student to make academic progress by modifying to their own abilities. It changes what the student learns. So in light of their disability, right, what do we need to change and what's happening with the content so that they can continue to learn and progress at the where they are. So we're meeting them where they are. So it fundamentally alters or lowers or changes expectations of course or assessment instructions, changes the what. So if we can remember that, it changes the what. So modifications do change what the student is expected to master. Course activity objectives are modified to meet the needs of the learner. So this is going to be a much smaller population of our students of getting modifications because we're really trying to keep students on track with their general education peers to the greatest extent possible as we move forward. So we're moving towards that diploma and then graduation. Some of our students, like we know they may be just receiving accommodations in certain portions of their day, but math is a big struggle, or writing is a really big struggle. And so we're having to provide some modifications in that area. So their whole day could be modified, portions of their day could see modifications. So again, like we really, through that IEP process, need to not just like be quick to like modify things, right? We really need to think about what that child needs and if we can limit the amount of modifications that we're doing and just put in heavier accommodations. But again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like it's all depends on the student. So here's an example of what would be a modification. So on the left, we have, let's say the class is working on 4-digit by 4-digit multiplication. A student they're not there, they're just still kind of mastering multiplication and they're in the early phases of that. So they're going to work on 2-digit by 1-digit. So we're totally changing the standard because the standard for this grade level at this time is 4-digit by 4-digit. And we're modifying it to accommodate where they are, right? We're adapting it to where they are so that they can get to 4-digit by 4-digit, but they're not there yet. So we're doing 2-digit by 1-digit. Another example is, let's say the students are reading The Giver. And this is a standard, one of the state standards that I listed here at the bottom. It's actually a state standard that you see intertwined through middle school through high school. And this one is determine a theme or central idea of a text, analyze its development over the course of a text, including its relationship to the character, setting, and plot, provide an objective summary of the text. Okay, so this might be the kind of the goal, the standard that they're working on in their class, and they're reading The Giver. So an accommodation for a student may be that they're going to listen to it. So, like as the class is reading, they're also going to listen. And so they have the auditory. Maybe they have some additional notes on it to help support their comprehension. They're going to build in some scaffolds to help them when it comes to the writing assignment, really kind of helping outline where, in this first paragraph, you're going to write, an intro, a thesis, and a supporting, whatever. So they're going to have a little more structure in place to help meet the standard. A modification would then be they're also learning about The Giver, but they're doing the abridged version of The Giver. So they've taken the chapter and really boiled it down to a couple sentences, a summary of what that chapter is about. And maybe they're also giving them like a graphic. Sometimes we use graphic novels too. That helps, like a very simplified graphics to follow of the book. But it's really, again, like we're taking this novel and really condensing it down to just the basic information of what happens in that text. So that way they can still work towards that standard, but again, it's pretty heavily modified for them and their needs. Okay, so let me take a quick sip of water. So, the same question then with accommodations. May student's grade reflect that modifications have been made that student to access the general education curriculum? And with modifications, it's a yes. So if modifications have been made to the curriculum of any course, it is important that the student's grade reflects the student achievement in the modified curriculum, as long as modified grades are available to all students. So if you look in, there's a link here that you can follow that will give you more information around this. So if you click on that, hopefully, it's going to take you to the CDE website that has it broken down for you. So if you want to learn a little bit more about reporting of modifications, accommodations, all of that, it breaks it down for you on the CDE webpage of promotion, retention, and grading. Okay, so you can dive into that a little bit deeper. When you click on it, it'll give you, let's say like this one right here. This is the modifications one. It gives you the little blurb on, explaining more. Okay, so that's modifications. So accommodations, we're all working towards the same target. We're just providing tools and other ways to access. Modifications, we're actually changing the what. The what is being learned is a modification. And then also remembering too that universal supports, like if you feel like, I really feel that larger lined paper would be helpful for my child, you can try it out. I mean, the teacher can definitely try it out as a universal support. And then if it works for your child, it can then be added to the IEP as an accommodation so that it's something they can continue to use from year to year. I guess the other point too I want to add that just like popped into my brain too is that students don't need to have the same accommodations for the whole life of their IEP. That sometimes students do acquire, well, a lot of times students do acquire new skills, and we can get rid of that accommodation or that modification, right? And they're ready for something else. And that's to be expected as they grow in their skills and their capacity and what's being done in the classroom. Those accommodations and modifications really should change. They should be changing as the student grows and develops and moves through the grade levels. Okay, so in the IEP, really, so let's think of the IEP document. So we start with our present levels page, which gives us all the information about your child, like how are they performing and academics and social emotional and communication, all of those things. From there, they determine what the goals should be. So based off of their present levels, we determine what should their goals be. And then based on their goals and what we've learned in present levels, that's how we should decide the accommodations and modifications that are needed for the student. So it's really kind of this fluid process of the IEP. Like we are building information as we go, and we're saying, okay, now we know these are the goals that we want to focus on. So what accommodations or modifications do we need in order to reach that, in order to get to that goal? So it's really a connected document. Those things will get documented on the services page. So it's above the service grid boxes, and it's broken into different parts. So it has a section for accommodations. And again, we can use the guide and use the definitions for accommodations I just gave you. And then there's a section for modifications. And then there's a section for other support. So if there's any consultation that needs to happen or additional aid support, that kind of thing, that'll go in this section. But in the actual IEP, we do have it broken apart with accommodations and then with modifications. So it is separated out so we can keep track of that. Any modification that is happening during a student's school day needs to be documented in the IEP. It's not an area that we just loosely throw around and start modifying work, right? Because we want to keep students on track with their learning. So if a modification is happening, it needs to be documented in the IEP. Accommodations are a little bit different. Again, we want to identify what are the accommodations that best support the student, make sure we have that documented for all teachers to follow. But sometimes we're like throwing in extra accommodation, like, we're watching a kid struggle writing his name. And so we're like, great, we grab a highlighter, we write his name, and then they can trace over it. That doesn't need to be in the IEP. It was like in the moment, a teacher recognized that they're not quite there with the skill yet, so they're going to provide some accommodations. So teachers do that all the time. And that's, again, part of that like universal supports. If we see a student struggling and we know we have a tool that we can easily access to help support, get them to master that skill, we can do that. But the modifications is definitely different. It does have to be documented in their IEP. Okay, so just some reminders that accommodations assist in removing barriers. Adaptations are not just for students with IEPs, so that's like why we have universal supports. The majority of our adaptations to the classroom are accommodations. The modifications must be spelled out in the IEP. And then we must identify the purpose of the assignment to help determine alternative ways to get to the end goal. There's another link here with resources. And this has it kind of broken apart again. So just a different way to look at it and provide some more examples for you to check out. The other thing that I do want to mention is that if there's any, and I'm going to go back one slide. So another thing that a lot of our students will use is we consider assistive technology. And that goes on the special factors page. So I just wanted to throw that out, that sometimes you'll see it on the special factors page. It'll also be listed on the accommodations on their services page. So if you do see that showing up in two spots, that is why. Assistive technology, we usually think of like computers, iPads, that type of thing, but it can be anything from very low tech to very high tech. So it's a tool that we're using to help them access their education. So like a graphic organizer, a pencil grip, a slant board, a special chair, an iPad, a Chromebook extension. Those are all tools that we're giving them and can be considered assistive technology. You don't have to have a full assistive technology assessment in order for that to be added to the IEP. So if it's like a specific app or Chrome extension or anything, they may want to do an assistive tech assessment to make sure that's the right one for them, because there's a cajillion out there, right? So we want to make sure that that's actually what the student needs. But a lot of our lower tech, those are just really great practices for students who struggle with a pencil grip or have a hard time taking notes off the board and need something slanted. So it kind of incorporates a whole range. But I just wanted to bring that up. So if you see it on the special factors page and you see it on the program accommodations, that's totally fine. That's what they're supposed to be doing. So don't let that throw you off there. Okay. So that takes us through kind of the learning for right now. What I would love to do is get your questions of, what you're seeing or what you're struggling with. I will stop the recording so that